It's great to see you all, and this is the first of 4 quarterly meetings this year, this one and the next 2 online. And the plan is, which we can always change at any time, to hold the rest offline in a venue, probably in London, which isn't great for everyone. So we'll listen to views during the year, see views on this, views on how it's going, views on how we might improve the format, everything else. And ideas about that meeting, probably in very early December or late November. I think we've penciled in a date in very early December, something like the 6th. Over to the first speaker then, and again, as I say, the idea here is to stimulate an interesting discussion. It's Dr. Prabodh Mistry, who most of you will know. Some of you may not have met. I think he's been a member for 3 or 4 years, Prab at least, but that does span the COVID time. So if you haven't met him, here's Prab. And if you don't know, Prab is works as an environmental consultant. He's been doing that for 30 years, but he's had a secret and even more interesting life, perhaps, as in values and education, because he's been devising character development programs with others for primary and secondary schools. And he's been evolving his own particular approach using, if I dare to say this, Prab, your sort of engineering, physics, and mathematical backgrounds. Don't get too alarmed or worried, to develop a slightly different approach. I'd call it a sort of 3D approach to values. And he believes this will have an interesting application to a lot of different areas, not just education. So this is really, I think, an introduction to that. But more than that, it's a way we're going to look at a specific example of how this approach might be used in particular cases. And so Prab has delved into international celebrity world, Hollywood, and all the rest. So it's not just engineering; it's stars and starlets and Hollywood coming into it. Prab, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Charles, for the introduction. So I'm going to be using slides from this end, Charles. So I'll
okay.
Start
I think
sharing the screen.
You're empowered to do so, hopefully, Prab.
Thanks. Slideshow. Does that?
Yeah, we're all seeing it.
Good. Thank you. So I've called this understand values, dilemmas, or understanding behavior, and allude to right actions if we can. I won't go into what is the right action very much, but let's, what I'll do, I will first of all go into understanding values by mapping to I will illustrate. Am I heard okay? There's a kind of a...
There's a bit of an echo there somewhere. Perhaps we can I'll go on mute and maybe if
And then I will go into the slap incident that happened at the Oscars almost exactly 2 years ago, and also allude to other situations where such a methodology could be applied. Clearly, only representing a small part of the work that I'm doing at the moment. So let's start. So the methodology that I have covered, and some of you may have actually seen the first short video of it. It's only 6 minutes long where I explain this methodology, but it goes into 2 ideas. The first one is that there are basically 2 core values, love and truth, that I use in order to then look at all the other values, almost like a mapping system that I have devised. The pretext of that is that all values have a component of rationality and emotion into it, or love and truth components in them. So what we can do is look at a value like justice, for instance, which has a concept of rightness in ethics. And if we, the idea of justice depends on who you ask. So, you know, a law court judge may apply justice by including, you know, both the components, love and truth, in equal measure or in a varying degree of measure. But that may go here, for instance. Let me just use the pointers. But if you ask the victim of a particular incident, then he or she might actually use justice in this format, where there's a degree of truth, but with a high degree of, or a degree of vengeance, as I call it. And just to explain these, this diagram, this is the origin or zero mark, where love axis actually goes horizontally. This is conditional love, followed all the way to the right with, towards unconditional love. And this is zero truth to absolute truth in the vertical direction. So these axes are endless, you could say. But these have limit, because, you know, we're kind of judging those from a human level point of view. So we can actually look at justice with those two definitions, or if you ask the perpetrator, then he may seek sympathy, you know, by showing a great deal of love, but he will clearly want to bend the truth somewhat. Again, these are not hard and fast ways, but we all interpret values in different ways, and this sort of methodology allows you to place your own definition much more objectively in this manner, and hence the use of this method. Next value, sympathy. Well, it's a form of comforting distress of a person, but then you may also have empathy, which is basically you know, involving a greater degree of understanding and trying to feel the experience of the other person. So what I've done here is that placed it higher up on the truth scale, but the love scale is the same, if you notice here, and so on. We can go into other values like pride. We can define that as excessive love of little truths, perhaps. So it's on the love axis, but as you can see, it's not really on the love axis at all, because it's at zero mark. Again, it could be in another position depending on the context. Next value, flattery. Well, we could define that as excessive praise based on little or no truth. So as you can see, I've actually put it a little bit on the untruth side, but a bit on the loving side there. The next value, cynicism. Again, that could be defined as belittling achievement of someone. So that's where I've placed it. Pretense, well, clearly that's untruth. So I've kind of put it right on the untruth axis. And vengeance, well, I've put it there. You know, again, these are not hard and fast positions, but they are indicative of one's views and so on. So that was the first idea that I introduced in the video. And the second idea was how we can actually use values at knowledge, thought, and action levels. And in my diagram, I normally refer to, you know, on this love versus truth axis, this being the Q1, which is the ideal, followed by Q2, Q3, Q4. And the green is for good, red is for bad, and obviously the amber colors I use for something in between. And I've just thrown in these typical values words because I use some of these in the incident article, which I've also kind of posted a year ago on my LinkedIn profile. So you can read the article at length, but I will be going into that very briefly shortly. And how do you then measure alignment of our values at these three levels that we operate at, knowledge, thought, and action levels? Well, I bring it together like this, in this kind of 3D model, as Charles also referred to earlier. And the thing to bear in mind is that, ideal quadrant that one needs to kind of work at is the green one, obviously, but this one is misaligned here. And as you can see, the twists between these two levels is showing the misalignment in a physical sense. So the twist really means tension or stress or whatever the case may be. And I define extrinsic tension as that between thought and action, so outer ethics, and our morality or intrinsic tension could be between knowledge and thought. So there's a kind of a bit of logic that I've put into this, which I will use. So let's go into the incident itself and try and apply this. And this analysis really came about last year when Katrina Ramage asked me to apply the methodology, which she clearly understood and had lots of questions about. But she said, can I apply this on the slap incident? And so I spent a bit of time, in fact, a whole weekend researching the incident. And I wrote an article, passed it to her, and then finalized it. And I published it on my LinkedIn profile on the anniversary of the incident, which I think was 30th or 31st of March 2022, and we're again in March 2024. So we'll go into a little bit of character traits, which we need to understand. Remember, my model is really about understanding our own self and our own values, but I'm applying this on other two people in principle. So I have to look at their character traits and so on. So that was based on research. So again, it may be limited by what I discovered, but I'll summarize those in any case. So please treat this with a pinch of salt somewhat. So Will Smith, when I did the analysis last year, he was 54, now 55, I guess. Actor from a young age, rapper and producer, received several awards for his work, charged of tax fraud in 80s and alleged to have assaulted his promoter. Now, I'm pointing these out because these are, it provides some links to the incident, and that's why I've actually picked those up. He actually made up with the promoter, and the promoter didn't press any charge. But again, this was big news at the time. And on a couple of occasions, he's actually been prosecuted for tax fraud as well. Again, everything from the public knowledge. His wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, had alopecia, a form of baldness, and she was basically, resigned to it. And she had openly posted videos about what the condition is, what she does about it. And she was actually being quite an inspiration to a lot of other people as well. So she was well known for her condition as well. Chris Rock, now 59, award-winning successful stand-up comedian, actor and filmmaker, known for his quick wit, but swears a lot, as you probably know. He has very coarse humor, and he jokes about race, sexuality, and deformity. Sometimes quite embarrassing to listen to, but nonetheless, that's his patch. At Oscars, which he had compared on a number of occasions, he's known for mocking actors, and he's also self-deprecating as well. Oscars in 2016, some of you may recall, they were surrounded by a controversy of lack of diversity. And at the time, Will Smith and his wife basically refused to attend. Chris Rock was asked to host the ceremony, as he had done previously. And given how sensitive the situation was, he did a pretty good job, and he was praised for that because he joked about race as well, but the jokes were, well intentioned on that particular occasion. He was invited again to host the ceremony, and during that time, he basically referred to Will Smith's wife, Jada, and said the following, which was the subject of the incident. And he said, "Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane too. Can't wait to see it. All right." That was a nice one. So he was really complimenting, in my opinion, with Jada's condition, to say, we need you to, we need you to take part in the next movie of this type. Smith saw his wife rolling her eyes, walked to the stage, slapped Rock, and returned to his seat swearing. And that's the incident that took place. What happened next? Smith apologized the very next day. Organizers of the Oscars condemned Smith and started investigation. Rock refused to press charges against Smith. And something I'll come on to later as well. If he had pressed for charges, perhaps there might have been some closure as far as Smith is concerned. But Rock didn't do that. He kind of let the matter rest there as far as he was concerned. Smith expressed deep remorse and resigned. He did refer to Rock at all in his apology, and I think that might have exacerbated the situation. He was banned for 10 years and lost lucrative contracts. Now, this is what I would use to do analysis. It's not, I'll show you this, but I will also move on to another representation shortly. So as you can see, what I'm doing is Chris Rock's values that I will go into shortly, and I can say what his knowledge situation was like, knowledge set of values, what his thought values were like, and what his action values were like at the time of the incident, but also exactly 1 year later, which is when I did the analysis. So based on whatever information there was on the website. And I also go into Will Smith, and I do the same. And as you can see, where all the values are aligned, but they're actually aligned with truth without love, something I'll come on to shortly. Whereas on Will Smith's side, as you can see, there are twists between each of these levels, before and even after, but there is a high degree of improvement. That's something that is probably best seen by this kind of representation. So what this shows is where Chris Rock was and where he ends up as far as his knowledge is concerned. So, Rock's knowledge, thought, and actions are judged to be aligned because as a comedian, he relies on vindictive truth without regard to people's feelings. And that's why I've actually placed him and his values in this quadrant. So a degree of bluntness and so on. And he's basically fanatic. He tells the truth, but without feelings. And that's why I put his values in this quadrant. And as you can see, unlike Smith's, where he starts there at the values at the time of the incident, and then a year later he's there. This guy stays where he is. He has each of those levels: knowledge, thought, and action. Whereas Will Smith, he overlooked a degree of truth about the whole thing, and he actually, basically violated against what he knew. there was a degree of tension between Chris and Will Smith beforehand, and after the incident, it turned to remorse because clearly Will Smith felt bad about what he did after the incident. So, the tension from the value went from tension to remorse. And as far as his action is concerned, clearly unfair action, and he now understands what the action. So that kind of basically captures. I should have actually given you the value score as well. I think they were in the other slide here. So Chris Rock's values remained at 42%. As I can tell you more about the measure, but I won't go into that. Will Smith's values alignment were overall 28%, and it improved to 75%. But as you can see, he still feels tensions, extrinsic and intrinsic tension. Again, things that we can go into. So in summary, Jada Pinkett Smith was reconciled to her alopecia condition, and she was really somewhat complimented, but Will Smith did not recognize that. Rock stuck to his professionalism, did not react negatively, and carried on. A tremendous character of Chris is that having been slapped, he carried on as if it hadn't affected him mentally, which is a strength of his character, in my opinion. He did not mention, anything of that again. He is blunt, definitely. He does not do feelings and unlikely to change his ways. Smith, on the other hand, is an emotional person, loving but can overlook basic facts or truths, may suffer remorse now, but he's a reformable character. I also felt, having looked at the incident, that the Academy should also have been called into question. They lacked inclusion, and hence the whole saga about lack of inclusivity. Chris Rock, they chose Rock because of his, because he's black, especially when they were having lack of diversity, but overlooked his values in terms of his bluntness and swearing. The Academy should feel responsible for the incident of 27th March 2022 and should bring back Rock and Smith together again. This is my last slide. Just to point to other situations where we could apply the methodology. Brianna Gay's stabbing has been in the news a lot, but really her mother, meeting the mother of one of her killers, is really, really exemplary, in my opinion. Two very empathetic women in my opinion, particularly Brianna Gay's mother as well as the other mother.
Can I interrupt you? Shall we move on to discuss really the slap rather than perhaps these ones, because we've overrun. Great. I'm just worried a little bit about timing. Give us plenty of time for everyone to talk.
That was the last slide. Have I stopped sharing?
If you stop sharing, then we can just see what people think about that. Okay. About the incident, really. Can you stop sharing?
Yes, I'm trying to see where I can stop sharing. Yes.
Okay. While you're doing that, that's great. Anybody got any thoughts about the incident, really, but also obviously about Prab's approach, his methodology? Should we give ourselves 5 minutes just to talk about it? And if anyone's got any thoughts, any reactions, as I say, about either the slap, which is well poured over in the media, certainly, but it just seemed to me a very interesting way of looking at it. I don't know if everyone thought that. Emma.
I just wanted to ask, does it kind of when you talk about their values, is this kind of values you're observing the way they live, and therefore you're kind of assessing what you think their values are? Is that how it's a observed behavior? And
Absolutely. This model is actually designed for self-analysis. It's not made for other people's analysis, but I applied it in that.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
Hi, Prab, thanks very much. And thank you for kind of leading us into this, because I think it's very thought-provoking what you've just talked about. My question is around whose truth. So in the situation, you've got truth from 3 different perspectives. So how does the model accommodate those, please?
Yes. The truth, given that the model is really about one's own values, it's really about judging from facts, experience, and what you have learned, from childhood, one's own mother, from religion, whatever the experience level one has had, to make that judgment as to what is right, what is wrong. And it can vary depending on people.
I mean, what it seems to me, perhaps, is it's not a method for trying to identify objectively what's true and what isn't. It's really a way of enabling one to come to grips with the fact that there's often more than one value sort of operating. It's our own values, but it's a way of helping us analyze our own values when often there's values pulling in different directions or values telling us different things. And it seems to me that's what you're doing in quite an interesting way. I mean, you're using truth and love, but actually if you wanted, or someone wanted, they could actually use different values if they thought that would work better for them in a particular situation, or just more generally. And it's enabling us to sort of see nuances and the way values actually aren't, I mean, they're all context dependent, and they're all subject to definition and all the behaviors associated with it anyway, but also the way they combine together. And simply truth and love are quite different values. A lot of values are grouped with one or the other, or in between. So would that be fair comment?
Very much so. It's a flexible methodology to actually engage in discussion. And this is why I feel targeting schools may be a way, something that I'm just kind of thinking about doing at the moment.
Anyone else got any thoughts or comments on how that worked out? Liz, yeah.
And not so much on the incident, because I hear what you're saying, Prab, about I can see the value of this as a self-reflection tool. I think I would find it quite difficult to use with other people, or in situations that I don't really know intimately. But I love the way that you've identified these twists and the tensions that can exist in different parts of ourselves, and this lack of alignment that can come through. So paying attention to that, I think, is really brilliant. And I'm curious to actually more think of a situation in my own life and apply that to me and see how that comes out. I mean, I would have to obviously read a bit more about the detail that obviously you refer to in the model, but I find that really interesting and helpful, that it's not just one single view values. Yeah, that we do actually have different values operating at different levels often, and that can be that can cause this lack of harmony, and really what you want is that inner harmony. And even if like Chris Rock, even if it's maybe a somewhere on that, in that quadrant that I don't think is ideal, to be aligned, I think is key. I don't know, maybe that's not true, because if you aligned on the no truth and no love, that's not good. Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have another example which I have used with this youth carrying a knife, and we won't go into that, but I can demonstrate the full rotation of
Right.
values at each level using that example.
Wow.
Liz, this reminded me of you during the pandemic when you told us about how you made a decision to shop more locally, but often you found yourself at the big supermarket.
Yeah, that's true. So understanding actually where that action misaligned with what a certain value comes from, because maybe it's and one of that can identify maybe somewhere else. Yeah. Those sort of competing values, isn't it, in a way?
But I just wonder, Prabh, I'm really Liz, likewise, I was very interested in that tension thing and how that plays out. Can you kind of use the model in tension between personal values and organizational values? Is there a way, because that's quite a big thing, I think, in the workplace.
Yeah. Something that I've actually been with Charles in discussions with the people in South Africa, for instance. But we can actually turn the model around to say policy, people, and practice in group situations. So at company level, we can apply that. One area that I'm interested in is in evaluating environmental, social, and governance in organizations. Again, policy, people, and practice, environmental, social, and governance. So yes, very much so. I would really love to find opportunities to apply these, sympathetically somewhat, because I'm still at a learning stage. But I'd love to spend time, free of charge, obviously.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Graham. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, Prab,
Please.
it's nice to meet you. Obviously, this is my first venture into this, and I appreciate you've had, all of 10 minutes to show us something you've thought a great deal about. I guess for me, because I work with a values measurement system, which I've practiced for many years, so I'm trying to sort of put that to one side and say, this is very interesting because it's very different to the sort of models and techniques. So what I'm interested in just today, briefly, is the point you made, which is you're projecting your own assessment onto that story. Have you and are you using that model where the individuals themselves are giving you the input? So you're getting their perspective and then using your model to say, well, that's interesting, and here's where the twist is. So they can then see that brought to life, as opposed to you assessing it for yourself.
It would be great to apply this in conflict resolution, which is where we could involve parties. But again, I'm at a preliminary stage, and something that I've shared with Charles only last week, I've actually produced another video, which, Emma, I think you'd be interested in, which is going into that kind of group analysis. I'll put it on YouTube, possibly Monday. Now, I'll share the link with Charles. So
Okay.
And
we'll also, what we could do is just, if anyone wants to stay on after our time's up, which is 2:30, and talk to, if Prab can stay on for a few minutes and chat, then let's just run on as long as we need to. In the meantime, can we just thank Prab very much? I think that's really,
thank you.
it's just different. We've all got our, I think our various systems and approaches to values. So it's just quite interesting. This is just such a different one.
Yeah.
And I think that by itself gives a lot of value. Emma's going to just introduce the next discussion, really, or lead a discussion. And those of you who don't know Emma, she's been a member of the UK Values Alliance for, I guess, something like the same length as Prab, is about 4 years, or maybe a bit longer, 4 or 5 years. But since we have seen each other so little over the COVID, and even have been slow to get together since then, it's good to remind you, she is an employment lawyer, but one with a twist, if I can say that as a fellow lawyer. She's an employer with a human approach, a human touch, which
not a values twist, right, Charles?
Not a values twist, no, a human approach. Unlike not just lawyers, a lot of professions tend to lose the human twist if they're not careful. She founded a partnership with a like-minded partner, Stephanie, who also is a member, and they put this approach into practice, and in the course of which they really deal with a lot of values dilemmas. They give legal advice on mostly employment situations to a lot of organizations. And there's a lot, as you'd expect, there's a lot of values dilemmas, moral dilemmas, values dilemmas, ethical dilemmas that come up. And Emma's going to just talk a little bit about that and pose some questions. Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks for inviting me to do this. It's been an interesting challenge just preparing for it. As Charles says, we set our business up because we fundamentally believe that organizations thrive when they live their purpose and values in everything they do. And so that's how we kind of approach employment law and to support them to be able to live their values when dealing with the legal issues. So before I launch in, I don't know, Charles, if you could put up like that first poll question I sent. Just wondered, to get a sense of the room, do you believe that the law sometimes prevents people and organizations from living their values? Just the first question now, if you answer that one.
Are you seeing the first question? Because it's a
I'm seeing the first question, yes.
Brilliant. It was a long time since I did one of these polls on Zoom, and they've changed the whole setup.
So it's just that, do you think the law sometimes prevents organizations from living their values? You're seeing it.
You're seeing it. Oh, I see. I can't participate, I think, because I'm hosting it. Okay.
Okay. Right. Well, the moment we're getting on that first question, we're getting 100%. That's what I was expecting. Thanks, Charles. Because it's often what people come to me and they just had this sense that the law gets in the way. So, are you sure? I'm seeing the results, Charles. You might just we've got 100%. That's okay for that question. So if we put that one aside, so there is this feeling that the law gets in the way, and I hope to persuade you today that actually it doesn't stop you doing things, but there are some some dilemma issues that need to be looked at. So to do that, I've realised when I thought about this, I need to actually explain to you what I think I mean by law. And so in this context today, I'm thinking of law as the rules that society creates for how we're going to work together, the framework for protecting individual rights, establishing norms, and for our interactions between people and organizations and the state. And we create these laws by electing politicians as a majority government who then make these rules and regulations that in theory represent what the majority wants at that time. We've kind of taken to their policies. That's how our democracy works. We create these rules and regulations, but it's important to remember it's in that context because they're not right or wrongs. They're just a version of how society has said we should live. Employment laws are one element of that, and that's what I'm aware of and focus on. But I think the principles apply generally. So what lawyers do is we look at the rules and we look at what the enforcement options are, because that gives you a sense of how seriously this type of issue is viewed. So you could have an enforcement option, which is court orders, do or don't do this with a penalty of going to prison. There can be civil and criminal liability. There you can be prosecuted for breaking some laws. There's compensation elements. So, okay, you broke the law, but pay the compensation and we'll all move on. And then there are some that are just guidance only, which don't really have any teeth. I mean, there's a big political fanfare, and actually when you look at them, they have no teeth. But they're a philosophy that majority is saying, this is what we think we should be doing. So they come in sort of different grades of seriousness. And we always are looking as lawyers at what the penalties are. Not because we're cynical, but you just need to get a sense of how they're viewed and what they're all about. So I see them just as structures we work within. So I thought I've got law. That's my idea of law. Then, all right, okay, if we're going to talk about values, I thought I don't want to open up values. So what I've decided for the purposes of today, we'll have two groups of values. We'll have values that are for society, ones that focus on business for good, planet, community, collaboration, responsibility, all those sorts of values. And then we'll have this other group of values, which are values for self, where an organization is focused on maximum profit, productivity, not explaining, getting the best for their shareholders, all those sorts of values. You can argue whether they're not values or not, but I'm just creating two different types of groups of values. So I think that's easier for our conversation not to get drawn into specifics of what is and isn't a value. And so when I'm working with clients, I always start with the values and then we look at the law. And I realized that if I was going to have a debate with some of the dilemmas we have, I needed a visual. So I created a visual, Charles. I don't know if you can put up that first slide. I created a visual that I just want to talk to because I think it might be easier to get you to kind of follow me. It's just that one image. So when I kind of got my head together around this, I thought, right, okay, I see that in this image, the river is the law and regulation. It's the rules guidance that is kind of meandering down through the country. In the top left-hand corner, you've got the sun, it's rising. This is the incident, the issue, the thing we're going to talk about. And then the trees are values that they represent our values. And then you'll see the river splits into two. On the left-hand side, you follow the law and follow the law. On the right-hand side, you break the law. So that's a very simple representation of law. You'll see I've got a couple of little grey tributaries there where brand and reputation and stakeholder interest has to be considered as well. But I'm not going to dwell on that because I'll get, just trying to make sure I can kind of see you. We're just kind of really looking about the values and the law and how they rub up together. So to kind of talk to this picture, I thought I'd start with that famous, obviously March 2022 was a very busy time because you will all remember the P&O incident when P&O just decided to dismiss all their employees without any discussion, and they escorted them off the ships, got control of their ships, pushed the employees out. And then actually what they did behind the scenes is they then approached every single employee and offered them a deal. And I was just thinking about P&O. So I thought, right, they're bound to have values that are self-values. I thought P&O will be driven by profit, shareholder interest, bonuses for organizations. I just assumed that would be their values. And I sort of applied that to my little image that I've created. I thought, right, they reach for their values and their focus is on maximizing return for the company. And this is what they're all about. And so when they came to consider this issue, that they needed to change everybody's terms and conditions of employment to reduce them, they looked at what the law would guide them to do. And the law would guide them to have a consultation process, which in a highly unionized workforce is going to lead to a very long trade dispute. And imagine the employees would sit in on the ships. There would have been a really big, tense, difficult negotiation. And they would have probably been trapped, unable to trade. They were in a post-COVID difficult situation. So I thought, well, what they did with their values is they said, right, well, we're focused on getting the best for our business. So what we're going to do here is we can't follow those laws, because if we do that, our stakeholders will be will be infuriated, we'll be stuck, we may not even survive as a business. So what we're going to do is break the law. We're going to look at what the law says. We're going to step across the river and break the law. And then once we've broken the law and got what we need for ourselves, I think they probably then complied with the law because they paid the compensation that the law said they should pay. And I think that's probably why most of the employees took the deals. They were generous. So this is in theory, they lived their values, focused on them, decided to just use the law to suit them, stepped across the river, and then decided how to deal with it. So that kind of fits just their values are yesterday. And it just made me chuckle because I don't know whether these values existed at the time, but their values are about the well-being of their employees, positive and just corporate culture, communicating, coordinating, collaborating, open, transparent, being an exemplary corporate citizen, and leaving people in better places than when they arrived. And so all those values that they have on their website now would have, on my sort of imagery there, I'd say, well, let's reach for the values. Now, if they were really living those values, they would have followed the law, because they would indicate you should do consultation, have a proper discussion. So then it doesn't kind of fit my program, because they obviously didn't follow their value. They didn't follow their values, their stated values, but they did something internally. And I wonder whether this is more a case of what their true values are internally, externally, and what they are. And perhaps just dealing with taking your words, Alan, maybe it's a conflict between lived and laminated values there. And I'm not going to dwell on it much more, because I think they didn't live their values probably, or what were their values? Their values were probably more focused on self and commercial reality, and that these published ones are probably just an external brand view. But it was a good example to show how you can just step across and then you can come back if you want to, when it suits you. So they did, of course, have the impact on the brand and the reputation. But actually, if we look at it, who now is choosing not to go on a P&O holiday because 2 years ago the staff all got dismissed? I doubt there are many customers that are making decisions on that basis. And the government said they were going to change the law, they were going to bring in all these protections, and the government hasn't done anything to make it harder for P&O to behave like that. So by living what I think their true values were, they probably got the outcome they wanted. It's just the ones they advertise now. Another example I wanted to share with you is an addiction charity that I was working with. And we can assume for this discussion that they have values that are for society. They were about caring, listening, supporting those in need. And they had an employee who turned up for work in a residential rehabilitation setting, having consumed alcohol. And so they called me to say, kind of, what should we do? And they were saying, what does the law say? I said, well, if we start with the law will tell you that that would be a gross misconduct situation. You'll be reasonable and fair, follow your process, and it'll probably lead to dismissal, because you can't have somebody coming into that environment who's been consuming alcohol. It's a kind of quite a clear gross misconduct situation. But then they said, if we look at your values, how is that going to work with you when you've got these values that are about caring and supporting those in need? And they sensed that this employee probably had an alcohol problem if he was coming to work in the morning under the influence of alcohol. And they felt very uncomfortable with removing the employment of someone who's in a vulnerable situation, because if they are vulnerable in addiction, if they lose their income, that's going to make their life even more difficult. And so we can look more at their values and what their values told them they should be doing. And so instead of being guided by the law, they looked for their values and they went into a much kinder, considerate place. So they did follow a process. It was clearly misconduct, but the outcome was to look much more at how can we support this individual? Can we give them another chance? How can we protect the workplace and protect our clients while still supporting someone who may need our help? So they didn't even buffer up against the law once they allowed themselves to just live their true values. And so that's why I think it's so important to always start with your values if you're truly living them. I mean, I'm taking the assumption that most of my clients are values led, so we encourage them to let their values guide them, and then to explore what the options are, and if you buffer up against the law, what that might mean and how you might navigate it. Just wondering time. I want to allow time for chat and questions. So perhaps I'll talk about another homeless charity that I was doing, because this one really surprised me when it happened, actually. But it was a very I was approached where they had an let's actually just say, did I? Yeah. So this is of outward-facing values. We can assume that they're values for society, but they were outward-facing. So they were about empowering people, equipping people to make their own decisions, to reach their potential, high standards, all that sort of thing you'd expect to see of an organization that's trying to tackle homelessness with their clients and the people they're supporting. So very strong outward-facing values. So if that second poll question, I don't know if you could put that up again. I don't know whether it's still there, Charles, but the question was, should outward-facing values be lived and reflected internally? What's the thought in the room on that? Can you put that? It was the second question on that poll, but it might be that you've done it already.
No, I can do it, but not at the same time as sharing the screen. So
okay. I see. So it's that sort of, I'm sure we've all come across these organization situations where the brand has all these values and this reputation that they promote, but are they living those internally? And I was just curious, because my mind has shifted on this. I just wondered what people thought. Should external facing values be reflected internally?
Can everyone see the poll? And
No.
you can't.
Okay. Let's just put your hand up, physical or the image one, if you think yes, they should be reflected internally. Sense of the room. Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I kind of thought that would be the answer, and I would have been so with you a few years ago. But I'm beginning to sense that sometimes there are values that are different externally and internally, and so I'm with you in principle. You need to have strong internal values, but actually, I'm in a place where I think maybe it's okay to have slightly stronger facing value, or not stronger, have certain type of out-facing values, but it's really important that you have strong internal values that complement, that sit together, but don't leave a gap. Whether that works or not. But let me explain about the homeless charity, because they surprised me when they came to me. So they have these really strong outward-facing values and deal with really tough stuff. So he had an employee who may be disabled, was off sick. You never know when people go off sick. They may be disabled, which gives them the protection of all the disability discrimination law. Poor attendance, and were raising concerns about the way they were being treated by their boss. So the classic kind of tricky situation where the law would say, right, have an investigation, deal with the grievances, get some medical evidence, think about adjustments, and how can you support this person? That would be the way to go. And he said, we're a very small charity. Our funding is given to support our clients. We have a really tough environment that we work in, and I need to live those values. I need to do what the business does. And if I follow what the law says here, I'm going to be spending a lot of money, time and energy and distraction, not delivering what the organization delivers. So he said to me, I am going to cross the river. He didn't put it like that, but I'm describing that to you now. Cross the river, not follow the law. You've told me what the risks are with that approach. I am going to take that approach. And I asked him about brands and reputation. And this is when he said to me, he said, Emma, he said, we deal with the toughest, harshest, most difficult decisions every single day under the bridges in the cities. He said, I am not worrying about my reputation for not supporting this particular person in this particular way, which I thought was just kind of an interesting reaction from him. And I thought, well, actually, sometimes your values will say, I need to go a particular way. And so he just made that conscious decision that said, I can't do that internally. I'm going to go across the river, deal with the consequences, and there might be no consequences. I mean, it's all just a level of risk. These are risk decisions that people take. P&O knew what it would cost and offered the money up front. He decided just to let it flow. Be nice, but just see where it went. And I just thought it's really interesting to see how you work. So that organization made me think about, well, you have these external facing values, which are about how you support your clients. What was missing was internal values about how they treat how they work together as a team. And that was a big gap in their organization. So he didn't have values to reach for that would work for them. And I don't know what they would be, but they clearly were a bit tougher, harder than we thought. So again, I don't think the law stopped them living their values, but it just required them to consciously look at that dilemma. I have another example. I'm just kind of conscious of time and kind of invite any kind of comments and questions really about how this works and how we approach it. Yeah. Brad?
My question is related to P&O incident. Given that it was such a high-profile thing and they broke the law, were there some consequences there?
Well, I mean, the consequences were that they paid up the compensation that the law said they would have to pay if they broke it. And I don't know, I'm not close enough to it, but I understand they offered every employee more than they could possibly get in a tribunal claim and said, here you go, up front, all this money, no legal costs, just sign this agreement. So they broke the law, but also complied with it. I don't condone what they did, but I just thought, oh, it's quite interesting. That's what you can do if you're quite ruthless. But it's nicer if you're living your values, I think. I felt more comfortable about it with the homeless charity, because I thought actually he is trying to live the values of the organization in making his choice to cross the river.
Yes, you have your hand up.
That's really fascinating, Emma. I love those two examples. My goodness, I've never thought of it like that. And it really challenges me to think about, so really the homeless charity and P&O, they actually did the same thing.
Yeah.
And in one, we tend to judge one as fine. Well, you know, I would tend to judge one as, well, that's fine because they're doing good. And then the other one is not because they're a greedy, profit-seeking, shareholder-serving. But actually, is that right? And if we look at mission of the two organizations, and then maybe, you know, I get that P&O aren't acting in line with their stated values. But,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
The mission of the two organizations, you know, and both probably acted in line with their mission. And you know, and maybe the values are just slightly on the edges of that, and the mission is at the center, and both could be said to have made a really good call.
Yeah.
From that, that's really interesting. I have to think about it. Thank you.
It is. I do think on a human level, you need the people making the decisions need to be able to live their values, because if you're going to make that tricky decision to cross the river, you probably want to feel rooted in your values.
These are a little bit like the corporate equivalents of the well-known dilemmas, values dilemmas, moral dilemmas of the starving boy stealing a loaf of bread, aren't they? Or all the examples that we can come up with if we go through a moral philosophy course. It's really the corporate equivalent, isn't it? It's the value of actually keeping the business going, of surviving, of living, against the value of doing something antisocial, or being pro-social. I mean, it's not pro-social.
But given that you've talked, I agree with what you're saying, that there's quite a lot of purpose and mission mixed in with values, which we often find. Purpose is a really big part of the advice we give. It does get in there the whole time, and it's important. But if you've got a moment, I'd just share one which is purely about living your values, which might be quite an interesting, unless someone's got a question that they want to ask. I had another example of a safeguarding charity who, again, have outward-facing values for society, which included respect, being evidence-based, and being brave. And they came to me with an employee with less than 2 years service who was underperforming and was distracting the team and the manager. And it was an irritation and causing them difficulties. And they wanted to know the legal risk is pretty low level in that sort of situation, but the principle would be that you should always have a meeting with an employee, because you never know what's lurking. So you should have a discussion, make a decision, and just be human about the whole thing. And the manager said to me, I want to be brave. Our values are brave. I want to be brave. I want to rip the plaster off and just get the dismissal done. I think it's kinder to everybody. Just get it done before everyone's upset. And I thought, kinder to who? I'm not sure that's kind to anybody, to be honest. But I asked them, I said, well, let's just kind of start with your values again. So one of your values is evidence-based, being thorough. How is it thorough to just tell someone they're dismissed and not explain the situation to them? And I also challenged the brave. I said it would be brave to rip the plaster off, but it would also be quite brave to have the conversation, because that's quite a tricky conversation, and probably braver to have a tricky conversation than just go into a meeting and do a dismissal. It was quite interesting. They did quite quickly say, okay, values really matter to us. Yes, we must live our values. We know the law says we could just do it, but we will do the right thing. And the interesting, so I persuaded them to have a conversation with the employee. And I always take a restorative approach. What happened? What's the impact? Why does it matter? Why is it happening? And how are we going to solve it? They had a really sort of positive, restorative type discussion with this employee. And the next day, the employee thanked them for the opportunity and resigned, saying she really appreciated the organization, but this job wasn't the right job for her. So in terms of protecting, living their values, they truly lived their values. They gave the employee respect. They listened with respect. They showed respect when she resigned instead of going, yay. They just were very nice about it. And they could feel the respect for themselves because they really, truly lived their values. In terms of brand and reputation, that's not just external brand. Internally, we hear increasingly now, those who haven't been impacted by a dismissal or a redundancy want to know that their colleagues were treated well. It's really important. They want to know that the values were lived, so sometimes it really matters. It really matters always it really matters how people are let go. And this so they lived their values and they weren't tempted to cross the river to the quick solution. They stayed online and actually comfortable all around. Everybody was happier. So the law doesn't tell us. It's a kind of just an option to nip across or stay with it. It's just a guidance. It's a sort of a boundaries we work within. So that's just more values based rather than sort of mission based. It was, what are we all about?
Brilliant examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Emma,
yeah.
what were the values of the homeless charity?
They were, I didn't write them down. What did I put down here? Empowering, equipping people to make their own decisions, to reach their full potential, very high standards for their clients, finding solutions, being transparent and responsible about what they do. I mean, they could all be internal values, but they had drafted them and created them as a brand, this is how we work externally together. Yeah. And I think beside that, you could have internal values that are a bit different, because that's very like about powerful getting people off the streets. You could have internal values that are about, we'll focus on collaboration. I don't know, but
Well, isn't there a difference between, it might be that they were outward facing, but it seems that I'm thinking that they were more client focused actually than outward facing.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, it was quite easy to make a decision because it was in the interest of their clients.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Hmm.
So actually always acting in the best interest of the clients ahead of what might happen internally. There is obviously always that branding thing. We for years telling clients, you can't have external ones and not live them internally. It's not okay. But I am beginning to think that's interesting actually that you say that. I just that if they're client focused, it's what's the purpose of the values, isn't it? It's where are you directing them?
Yeah.
Sorry, just one other point is that I think you've raised in that last story how unless you're careful, people can weaponize values. You know, like the guy who tried to pretend that he was being brave.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It is a lovely little. I'm quite pleased I drew that picture for this, because I found it quite helpful myself, because it's some of these things we just do in our head when we're giving advice, and now I'm thinking actually that's quite a nice way to explain it to clients. Be able to say you've got this option, but you've also got this option, and what's right for you. In the employment field, following your values, because like managers have to do these tricky things.
Yeah.
Feeling empowered by your values is a really nice blanket to put on, isn't it? As you step into the tricky conversation, it's a sort of, and then I add in purpose. Like if you know what you're doing will help deliver the purpose of the organization, that kind of makes it much less personal and more focused, and a good place to be.
Emma, we got a question, I think, from Lindsay and Graham as well. Perhaps Lindsay, I think you put your hand up first.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Emma. It's really, really interesting. I really enjoyed Prab's talk as well. Emma, just on the kind of dilemma between the law and values, I have quite a very recent example of a client who was sacked by their organization within 2 years of being employed, literally 3 days, I think, before their 2 year. So they couldn't be sacked for unfair dismissal because they hadn't been through a formal performance, discipline type process. And it's the organization that I work with. Interestingly, a very values-based organization, and I was quite shocked when she told me that, she'd been sacked in this way. And then I said to him, and how did it happen, and what did they do, and have you got compensation and so on? And once she talked through it, I could see that they had used the law to their advantage, because there was a big issue with some of her behaviors and how it was affecting colleagues and the team and so on. So they'd used the law, but actually they paid her more than she should have been paid in terms of compensation in the kind of P&O sense. And they'd agreed to give her a really good reference, and a personal reference as well as a company reference. So they'd acted with integrity, which is one of their values. but brought an end to a situation that was becoming untenable, but didn't want to have to take her down the performance route, but used the law to do it very quickly so that they didn't have to go through the unfair dismissal, because it was more of a personality difference and a clash of, you know, behaviors, which is quite difficult to deal with in a law, you know, a legal kind of HR sense. So it's just a very recent but very interesting kind of dilemma between the using the law but doing it in a values-based way.
I think that's right. And we do really pay a lot of attention to the human side of how you communicate whatever it is you decide to do, because there are, in your kind of scenario, that could be in the round the right thing for the organization and the individual, but there are ways you deliver it. You don't call them in and just tell them. There's a way to, unless you've only got one day left, then
well, that's kind of what happened. They did call her in, and it was kind of straight off the premises, but they've offered her counselling, they've offered her outplacement support and all sorts of things, but you know, absolutely, you know, horrible situation.
I suspect what that reflects as well is going to sleep on the job, really. You know, the managers who were not alive to living the issue, you shouldn't be up one day against it. You should have known 3 months before that this wasn't going to work out. So there are lots of things at play in it. But you're right, you can break the law and then bring yourself back on and do the right thing as best you can, while for the organization as a whole doing the right thing, and for the individual, if you can explain it well, like that ripping the plaster off discussion, if you can have a proper discussion, that can be so powerful for the emotions that an individual has to go through when they're losing their job. You know, they've got to deal with the shock, the denial, there's, you know, all of those things just have to be thought about. There's another question.
Great.
Well, not a question, Emma. I just want to say I think the diagrams is perfect, and if you only did that for this talk, then I think you've just invented a tool that's very helpful for anyone. I understood it immediately, and I think it's really powerful, as was your talk. And I think you brought up some really good examples. I just wanted to make an observation, which is I think the way you've described the scenarios makes the case for organizations to truly think and work through what their values should be and whether they're going to run their organization according to them. And I think that's often missing in a lot of organizations, the understanding that if the values truly work, then, forgive the expression, I say this for context, you hire and fire against them. And if you're not, and you make your decisions as a business strategically, and that is the acid test of whether the values are any good in the first place. I would subscribe to making sure that the interpretation of values, which is a task in itself, means that you have one set of values for organizational. I mean, I think it's different when it's product values are different to organizational values, but I would I'm more in the school of have the same set of values, because I think it demands rigor around their selection. But really, really good talk, and I really like the model. Thanks, Emma.
Oh, thank you.
And say hello to Stephanie, because I haven't seen you two for years.
No.
Just one very last quick comment is, I wonder whether one can take organizations' values and almost put a range of definitions around them, because there would be clearly demarcation points beyond which you cannot go. So it gives you that kind of framework to play within.
I think playing within frameworks it's what we do as lawyers, but it's knowing you could. So Charles, you're probably wanting to get on. Can I put up my last slide and just do a minute's conclusion on it, because I got ChatGPT.
I think Chauffeur, you were wanting to say something. Is that right?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you. This is my first time.
Yeah, you've gone on to mute. I don't know why.
Connected on LinkedIn, and we were meant to meet yesterday, but it all went wrong, the technology. But it's really interesting because so I lead on my title. It probably says Atrox Vision International. That's the charity I run outside of my main work. So my main job is working for Westminster Youth Council. I'm the strategic manager for that, but it's so fitting to be in this meeting today, because just yesterday there was a big announcement. The British Youth Council, who oversee all the youthy mayors and youth councils all across the country, is closed suddenly after more than 75 years due to financial challenges. So I had colleagues that because they're not part of Westminster Local Authority, they're, the body we work with, in tears, because I've known them. I've been doing this job for 7 years now, and I've called them, and they found out at 3 p.m. yesterday that they were all made redundant. And if you look at the civil society article here, it says how many staff. Hold on a second, let me just find it. Charity had 19 staff and an income of 82600 in the March 2022. So all of these staff members at 3 p.m. yesterday were told that they're not employed anymore. And also I manage the platform I manage. I'm overseeing up to, I've got 100 young people on my register, and everybody's like really worried. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. I don't know if anybody has heard, and this is a 75-year-old establishment, but I know they recently merged with the Body Shop, which also got into some trouble, didn't it? So that's where I'm at. I really don't know, what I'm doing here, if I even belong in this space. But Charles and I are going to meet hopefully next week properly.
Well,
is that okay, Charles?
No, that's okay, Shofa. Thanks so much for the contribution.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
do that. There's someone else that's come a little bit late. I'll let him in if I may. But in the meantime, let's just share. You want to share the notes?
Yeah. And just to say thanks, Shofa, there are crisis situations that it's very hard to manage sometimes, but just hope you can do the best you can with the limited time. So I just want to show this image because I asked ChatGPT to create for me an image of a wildflower meadow because it's my thing, and I was quite pleased. I'm not often that pleased with what ChatGPT comes up with, but I just want to live this image because this is how I kind of look at the law. So if you imagine a wildflower meadow, and within it, it's got natural limitations. There's limited water, there's limited sunlight, the quality of the soil varies and is limited. But within those natural boundaries, there is this amazing array of wildlife and flowers that are thriving, all in their own individual ways, delivering their own purpose, whatever it is they want to deliver to the world. And they are working within those limitations. And I see it like the law. The law is just a set of boundaries within which we as organizations have to operate. And within those rules, we can be the most vibrant version of ourselves, and we can do what we want to do, live our values, be ourselves. And sometimes we might buffer up against the law, and you make a choice. Do you step through that buffer, like the field mouse who might decide to step out of the natural resources of the valley and test itself elsewhere? Can it survive? Has it got to adapt, deal without water or whatever? And then does it come back in? But I just love this idea that we can all be ourselves and truly thrive. And we just occasionally buffer up against the law. And so at that point, you make a decision about how you want to operate. Someone described it to me as a constant dance. And I thought, actually, that's kind of what it is. So, yeah. Thank you for your comments. It's been fun to prepare for this and to explore it.
It's been great. Well done. Thank you so much, Emma. I think it's a fascinating discussion, really, and it hasn't finished, of course. We could go on and on and on, as we could with Prabs as well. I'm going to hand over to Neil. We wanted to, I don't know whether we can still squeeze it in, but we'll give it a try. We wanted to just flag an idea, a theme, a thought, a possible initiative that we've Alan, Neil, and I been talking about over the last month or two, and it's all about national values. Over to you, Neil.
Well, yeah, Emma's got me with her lovely meadows and wildflowers and all that. Yeah, I mean, this is really very much an open topic, and the focus of this last piece of discussion was about sort of questions around national values in the UK and whether a discussion of national values, the need for them or not, would lead to a group of people wanting to work together to define a sort of process for the development of some set of national values. And so really, the outcome of this discussion, and we are slightly limited on time, is not to answer the question of would national values or a more defined set of national values be a good thing, but it really was to try to get some interest from the UK values community in a sort of group of people who have an interest in that and would like to form part of maybe some sort of group to try and take it further. Now, funnily enough, Emma's done a cracking job, because some of the things that she was saying, for example, was, she's talking about values, I think, creating boundaries, not as a fact, but as more of a question. And so when you think about national values, and in fact, as most of us know, there is sort of an existing set of national values, which I think, Charles and Alan, were produced around 2011, which were as a result of the PREVENT strategy. And at that time in 2011, there was significant government concern about terrorism. And that was the reason why that set or a strategy for national values was put into place. And I think that has spilled over at various times into the education sector. Now, very quickly, the sort of things that PREVENT strategy came up with were things like democracy, rule of law, respect and tolerance, and individual liberty. But I think where Charles, Alan and I were is that we would quite like to work with people within the community to debate the issue of creating perhaps another set of national values based not upon a sort of knee-jerk reaction to the PREVENT strategy, but in a more sort of leisurely way to really explore the subject. And I was really going to, in the time we've got remaining, sort of throw it open to everyone to gauge if there would be any interest in engaging with us to try and develop this to see where it might go. So it's not something, just so I'm absolutely clear, it's not something we say we are going to create a new set of national values, but it's really more about engaging with people within the community to explore the process of how we might go about it, assuming that the general feeling is that it would be a positive thing to do. I hope I've expressed myself clearly, and really in the time we've got remaining, I was going to throw it open to other people on this call to gauge their reaction. So could I pass that over to you for any comments or that you have?
Yeah, Prab.
Tremendous dilemmas at the moment with respect to groups like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and what government is trying to do to stop them. A lot of them are actually driven by their internal values, and they're very deep-seated values. And people are prepared to, kill themselves on the roads trying to stop traffic just to make a point. And I think this kind of discussion can only benefit, we can try and understand what the issue is, because clearly rule of law is one of the values you just mentioned as a British value. But can we go against it, just like Emma's examples for P&O and so on, live the values, etc. So I like the idea.
Yeah, Graham.
Really interesting question. And as you say, you referenced that it has been done. It has been done in the past. The Barrett Values Organization, of which I've been part for now 15, 18 years, used to conduct international values assessments around the world. And the last summit on this is probably about 4 or 5 years, maybe a bit longer now, which I went to, where the sets of results were presented. And what the purpose of that was to say, what do the people of these countries say? I mean, given obviously you haven't talked to everybody. I guess the question it prompts in me is, forgive my bluntness, but so what, and who will use them? Because if the government are the, if you like, the jurisdiction of how we are going to behave as a country, or that seems to be what they think they're doing, then one wonders who is going to use them. Because to your very well-made point, you know, individuals hold very strong views about many things, and club together to do so. But who is, you know, for what purpose would we want to establish a set of national values, as opposed to asking people what they think they are just for the sake of knowing, particularly in this country, which has changed so much in, well, certainly 20, 30 years. So that would be my...
I think that goes back to the discussion that Emma had, looking at the relationship of the law and values. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely key to it. And, you know, the Prevent strategy in 2011 wasn't created, well, it was absolutely that knee-jerk reaction, as I've said, which must have been linked to fear, I guess, in terms of the fact that the law probably wasn't strong enough at that time, or hadn't caught up to a number of these changes in public attitude. I think since then, since 2011, I would say, you know, public attitudes in this country have gone through, well, I was going to say, it's probably not too strong a word to say they've gone through a revolution in some areas. If the driving force in the 2011 review was the law, in 2024, maybe it would be interesting to come at it at a different angle, not driven, as I've said, by the knee-jerk reaction that existing then. It's a very changed place, the world.
I mean, the main. Sorry, Aaron, you go.
Okay, thanks. Just something else to bear in mind. There was a poll that we put on LinkedIn asking what people felt drove values more significantly, and gave them the option of government, organization, faith, and local community / family. And okay, small number of people, 30 odd, responded, but 2/3 of the respondents said it was the local community and family that was the key driver of values. The other 3 were evenly spread. And so maybe there's a question around that dialogue being driven at a grassroots local level rather than trying to be driven at a central level.
Yeah, Emma.
I think values are like, they're so fundamental to how I operate in me, and my values are different from other people's. And the idea that you would ever have a chance of having national value, it'd be lovely to think we could have national values that everyone agreed to, but given the political mess we're in, I just wonder how you would ever get any consensus about values. I wonder if it's more about, not values, is it more about what we're all about? Because I think values sit beside purpose in any kind of organization. And there may be something more that could politically be successful, is if there was a clear vision to what Britain wanted to be, rather than the values we live by, but this is what we want to represent and our purpose. Just
emphasizing what Alan mentioned about the survey and what the purpose might be, and I like, Neil, that you're not kind of having a clear, you know, do this at the end of it. You know, let's discuss this and see where it goes. And I mean, what I think we could do as a short-term measure, maybe set ourselves a target of 4 or 5 meetings, but to come up with just a paper that might be taken to local groups, you know, like community groups, you know, where families may be represented as well, just to get their views, and perhaps organize a survey, you know, tick box, but also value linked. that might actually give us more credence down the line about, so what, take it elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the big thing, the big problem, it seemed to me, with the national values that the government came up with 13 years ago and have persisted in putting forward. It's not so much they're bad values or anything, but it's because they came up with them without any consultation whatsoever, didn't they? And if you try to bring in, I mean, we live in a world where we talk a lot about our own values. Increasingly, that's true of individuals in this country, around the world. We talk about organizational values. It's a given that you have to have organizational values. And yet we don't seem to really think the same with national values. Now, there may be good reasons, I can see that. But if you're going to talk about national values at all, maybe you shouldn't, but if you are going to, you really need to talk to the people in the organization. You need to talk to the people in the country. And one wonders whether it actually might not, I mean, the whole process of an organization, if they really think through, go out to the members of the organization and discuss what their values should be. It's a very, very powerful process, isn't it? Because all of you have done it at various times. All of you have done it a lot of times. Talking about values is powerful. Talking to an organization, a group, about what their values are, what their values maybe should be, or how different sets of values can reconcile with each other, and all that discussion is really, really valuable and powerful. And I think maybe it would be a really, really powerful idea if we could actually go out and start that sort of discussion. Really not so much, maybe not even clear at the time about what the objective might be. Graham's question, well, what will you do with it? But actually, maybe the process itself would be really, really interesting and really able to bring people together. It might drive them apart. I mean, you never know. But given that the Barrett Value Survey that was done in this country, which prompted and catalyzed the launch of the UK Values Alliance in 2012, 2013, given that actually showed, like it does in every country, that 70-odd% of the country have, individuals have or claim to have, these really positive intrinsic values, human values, you might say. Given that that's the case, then maybe there's a lot of common ground that we can uncover. And if we can do that, it would be really, really powerful, I think, and interesting. And maybe do it community by community. I don't know how you do it, but I think it's a really interesting possibility if there's a way of getting it and getting enough people on board, enough other institutions and organizations on board to explore it, just to get people talking about it.
I mean, I certainly think it's worth discussing. And again, back to what Emma said, on Radio 4 this morning, there was a discussion, very quick discussion, about the fact that there was a possibility that in future, if you misgendered a person, it would be a criminal offence. So it seems to me that increasingly, as the law tries to catch up with how society is working, it's the things that are defined like the law which are really leading the values discussion. And I'm not sure that that's the only contribution that we want. If, as Emma said, that we should have values sitting beside purpose. So I think we're in a bit of a muddle at the moment. And I think, as we said in some of the blurb, what we can guarantee is, because most places on earth are facing an election this year, politician after politician will be using the values word to try to use that as a community call for people to come together. But there's really no context or substance behind the use of that word, because it's never defined in a meaningful way.
Well said. I'm with you, Neil. I don't want you to misunderstand me, but I think Emma said it as well. If we had a vision for the country that said, an ultimate umbrella vision for the country that said, this is what we want Britain to be in this new multi-discipline, diverse world that we live in, then these things are intrinsic to the way we wish to govern, whether we're blue, red, yellow, orange, or green. That would be a great start. Of course, I'm not being a negative. I'm probably more pragmatic around saying, let's find a purpose for it that would be powerful, which drives the motivation for the work that would be very interesting to do. So please don't misunderstand my
No.
my so what question, but I just like I've been down this road and I was involved in the Barrett work, and I think it's petered out. I think people just stopped being, because they felt, well, you know, almost what's the point, which is not an answer, but that was what happened.
Yeah.
And I know everything you've said, you know, you make complete sense, but there we are. I won't go on.
Okay.
I've only been in there once. I'd like to come back again, so I'm going to
Come back.
You'll suddenly find I can't reach you any longer. They've cut me off. He's obviously a troublemaker. We don't want him here.
It does need to be relevant, though, Graham, right?
Well, it does, and I
having it for the sake of it.
Yeah, and I spend my life, like all of you do, in organizational values and with leadership teams. So we're speaking a very common language. I love some of the threads and the different viewpoints. They're really valuable. Anyway, that's it. Zip.
We probably ought to wrap up. Prab.
Yes. Another quick thought is, I've read that where there is good government, the values tend to be kind of taken care of, and people don't value the values as much as they should. But where the government is bad, it's the values that actually bring people to the fore, you know, to make the changes in society and so on. I'll have to dig out where I actually saw it, but I found that very, very interesting. That you know, there is a relationship between personal values and government or governance of the country.
Well, there absolutely must be, mustn't there?
Interesting point, though. Very interesting point, Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
It's the
Okay.
seed of revolution.
Philippa's signaling that it's time to go. And it probably is. We're a little bit overdrawn, overrun. So thank you very much, those that are still here. Thank you so much again, Emma and Prab. It's really revealing the complexity, really, of trying to do the right thing.
Yes. And trying to perhaps put some measure on attention.
Yeah, and trying to put that, yeah, absolutely. We better go.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Prab. Bye.